All right. So we made it through book one, at least, in our schedule. Now, whether or not everyone is there is totally fine. Um, book two is both harder and easier. It's harder in terms of what is going on. It's the most mysterious, and there's kind of, because Finnegans Wake is circular. There's this sense of equivocality that I talked about last time, where, in a sense, every part is like every other part. There's equal weight throughout the book in terms of difficulty and whatnot, but that's very simplistic, and it's generally acknowledged that just like Sean's Siglum, there's a rising and falling going on here, and the sort of height of the difficulty is here in book two, and also the height of the mystery that's going on. And there are lots of tales of various cycles that are being told in Finnegans Wake. One of them being this relationship between birth and death. And one of the things that I have never really been privy to myself, because I've never read the source material, is the relationship of Finnegans Wake to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which Joyce was familiar with and put a lot of content from that and allusions of various kinds into Finnegans Wake. So if you know anything about that, um, that might help you. But Joyce was very interested in kind of breaking down these boundaries between any of our binaries, between life and death, between youth and age. And at the beginning of book two, we are in what has been called the Mime of the Mick, Nick, and the Maggies. And this is, as I said last time, a little game that is being played. And it's a childhood game, importantly. So the book two is a lot about the mystery of childhood and these sort of formative moments where we're sort of going back to the very beginning of human history, and this is being analogized through these early moments of childhood. And in this case, there's a game being played amongst our two dueling brothers, Shem and Sean. Um, in this case, Sean is the Archangel Michael, I think. Yeah, and then Shem is the devil. And they're sort of battling it out here. And basically, Sean is keeping Shem from the knowledge of these 29 Maggies, or the Rainbow Girls, as they're called other times in Finnegans Wake. And basically, in order for Shem to be able to have access to these women and therefore to some nascent sexuality, he has to play a game and he has to win. So there's something of a sort of courting contest going on here. There's a lot to do with the relationship between, games and frameworks and competition and dominance going on here. Sean is, right, he's the archangel. He is the tip top of this sort of hierarchy of beings, and he is dominating the devil, which in many ways he's a very Shem, the devil, is a very conniving character and very smart. And we'll see that smart role be adopted in the Nightlessons chapter in chapter two of book two. But right now in the Mime, Shem is basically the submissive character, and basically he has three times where he comes up to Sean and tries to answer this sort of riddle about what is the color of the Rainbow Girls' panties. And this has some real world bearing because Joyce in real life had a fetish for women's panties. So this is his way of sort of fictionalizing that, sort of working through these questions of sexuality, of growth, and whatnot. And in this case, the answer to the riddle is heliotrope. That is the color of the panties, is heliotrope. And there are a number of problems that come up with this color because it's not really a color. It's a very polyvalent word. Heliotrope has a lot of different meanings. And one of the things that's really interesting with the Egyptian mythology stuff going on here is one of Sean's other personas, in addition to being the Archangel Michael, is Helios, this sun god. So heliotrope, right? A sunflower is a heliotrope. It's a type of plant that follows the sun throughout the day and basically aligns itself with the sun. So in this case, Sean is this sort of nascent authority figure that the Maggies are always, they're all heliotropes, kind of pointing towards Sean at all times, deferring to his authority. And unless Shem can figure out this cipher and kind of make his way into authority, he can't play this game of sexuality. So the whole chapter is this very musical sort of ruse uh, about infantile sexuality. There's lots of different angles that one can, like, I'm sure a Freudian lens would do unwell here, but I'm not really familiar enough with him to be able to give anything groundbreaking. Um, but yeah, that's just kind of an introduction to book two because the first two chapters, it's pretty clear what's going on. There's a sort of mock narrative going on here, right? Relative to the chapter, we can figure out what's going on. Um, but especially by chapter three of book two, at least for me, it gets a little confusing and I start losing track of what's going on. And it's not really until book three that I start to get a sense of the plot again. But as Cynthia has talked about before, the plot-centric approach is not always the best approach. Um, and this first chapter of book two is the best for those interested in the poetry of the book because it is all about song and music and dance, right? They're doing a lot of different dances. One of the dances being alluded to throughout this chapter is the sacrificial dance from Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. And this has a lot of interesting similarities because in Stravinsky's ballet, you've got this spring god that is being worshipped, and in order to do so, they have to sacrifice a virgin. So the whole of the ballet is these girls. They eventually start dancing in a circle, and one of them gets chosen to be sacrificed. So there's this relationship between groups of women and a single woman. Um, and also just this sort of vital, animistic, primeval dance that's going on. So that being said, does anyone have any kind of and any thoughts they want to get off their chest right now about how we're feeling about the book, or how are we feeling the themes are developing, or the narrative, or are we having questions about the characters, anything like that? I don't know. What is tickling one's fancy?
Is I know that people have mentioned Epstein. He says book one is it's about space, now time, and no things happen.
Hmm.
And then he says time begins in book two. So it's very attractive to think that, though I don't know if like it's kind of a consensus among like scholars, but um, I'll be interested to see if that is the case.
Yeah. Yeah. That's certainly something that, like, I think probably all of those sort of simple schemas that split things into discrete parts are going to be inadequate, but I think there's certainly something to that. I mean, the problem with Finnegans Wake, and it actually will kind of formally address this at certain parts, is it seems to reject the law of non-contradiction. And for those who don't know, the law of non-contradiction is a very basic element of Aristotelian logic that says that something cannot be one way and its opposite at the same time and in the same respect. And there's a whole philosophical tradition that rails against this, culminating, at least in the Western tradition, with like Hegel in the Phenomenology of Spirit, is very wary of the law of non-contradiction. But Joyce is interested in some earlier figures, particularly Giordano Bruno. And Giordano Bruno, I may have mentioned last time, has this coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposites, um, which is sort of intrinsically opposed to this idea that opposites are mutually exclusive. It basically says that, nothing is just itself. It always comes in a pair with its opposite, and they sort of balance each other in this eternal cycle of seeking equilibrium. And that's what Finnegans Wake is in an important sense. And that creates a lot of problems for talking about it because, like, this idea of Epstein's that nothing really happens in book one and then things start to happen in book two. You could really say nothing happens in the whole entire book, especially because it's a cycle and we come right back to where we started. Um, so right, there's always two sides to any or multiple sides to any Wakian coin. But I certainly think there's something to that distinction, right?
If you might, can you give me, you said, Gavin, you said that book two is very poetic. Can you give me an example of that?
Yeah, yeah. Here's a good example, and I think Cynthia, you'll dig this. So there are a number of times where we are told what the answer is to this game. We are told that the solution to the color of the Maggies, the Rainbow Girls' panties, is heliotrope, quote unquote. And it always seems to be told in terms that both Shem and us don't really understand. It took me like three reads to even figure out that heliotrope was the answer, and I only found it out because I was looking through McHugh's guide. Um, but we are literally explained in very interesting poetic details how to pronounce the word trope, and that's in these three lines. Arise, land under wave. Clap your lingua to your palate. Drop your jowl with a jolt. Tambourine until your breath slides. Pet a pout, and it's out. Have you got me, Alley Sloper? So this Alley Sloper, this is ALP, right? A, L, and P are in there. I'm not sure that ALP is being talked to here. I think maybe ALP is being alluded to. But right, clap your lingua to your palate. T, 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 t. Drop your jowl. T. And then tambourine. Trope. So we're doing a little rolled R because Joyce is a properly Italian man. Um, until your breath slides, and then pet a pout. P. So we have the P sound with those P words, pet and pout, and it's out. So this is one snippet. Notably, it's not the whole word heliotrope. It's just trope, which is kind of unhelpful because that only gives us part of the solution when we're ostensibly being told what the solution is. But this is one case where we can see that this chapter is really interested in performance, in action, in staging, in the idea of tropes, right? In rhetoric, a trope is a sort of figure, and in this case, it's literally being deployed as a trope, in this case, trying to explain in detail how to pronounce something. And for those who are kind of interested in finding explicit references to the heliotrope, read this whole page and you'll find some little my middle I ope before you. So this is the I in the middle of heliotrope. And we have literally the OPE at the end of trope. So there's all sorts of tiny, tiny, tiny little nuggets we get of a solution, but the chapter seems to be more interested, like Joyce often is, with playing the game than he is with finishing it or solving it, right? For those who are interested in a sort of dance perspective, here's one more that I really enjoy. This to me, again, this is totally my subjective opinion, is an allusion to the sacrificial dance from the Rite of Spring, where the girls are dancing in this big circle. Although there are many traditions that have women dancing in a circle. So and so, toe by toe, to and fro they go round. For they are the angels, scattering nods as girls who may, for they are an angel's garland. Catchmire stockings, libertide garters, shoddy shoes, quicked out with silver, penny fair caps on penny fair frocks, and a ring on her fine thin finger. And they leap so looply, looply as they link to light, and they look so lovely, love lit, noosed in a nuptious night. With Aisley glinson and decoy glance out, they ramp it a little, a lessel, a lissel, then romp ride round in a rout. It's got this very, very nice kind of rhythm, right? It starts to sort of churn on its own and just uh, establish its own dynamics. Again, coming back to that Beckett phrase, it is not about something, it is that something itself. in this case, your sort of body and your mind and maybe even your mouth are literally doing this churning circular movement. Does anyone have any passages that they want to look at in this chapter, or even again any of the ones before? We can always kind of double back and go to different spots and reread the first page if we want to. Like it doesn't matter.
I had originally thought of that passage, Gavin,
Oh, nice.
from Catchment, yeah. Specifically, I don't know where I read it, but relating to Joyce's exile, like if it's kind of they're waiting maybe at a train station or something, you can imagine,
Hmm.
and anticipation and kind of they're ready to flee off. I don't know why, but it's really interesting how Joyce got from Dublin to the continent. I always imagined he'd like get a ship to Trieste or something, but it
Yeah.
was ferry across to Holyhead in Wales and then a train all the way to London and then onto the continent. And then as soon as you get to the continent, it's just a sprawling kind of. But yeah, that I think it points to that this passage as well as what you were saying about the action of saying it.
Yeah. Yeah, and for those, because there is some character setting that goes on at the beginning of the chapter on page 220 and 221. We get all these names for the floras, Izod, this is Izzy, and then we have Chuff and Glug in here, among other characters. And Chuff and Glug is another name for Sean and Shem. So Sean is Chuff and Shem is Glug. Um, and we get a sort of explication of their roles here on page 222, where an argument follows. And I know argument has like a technical, it's the same thing about like in the Catholic tradition, like ejaculation has a very specific meaning that is totally different from the sexual one. I think there's something going on here with that argument. But we get Chuff and Jug described, sorry, Chuffy and Glug described in their roles. That Chuffy was an angel, so an angel then, and his sword fleshed light like lightning, right? So this is his lightning sword, but also this is another phallic image because over and over and over, masculinity and authority are being associated symbolically with phallic images, which are always falling or failing in various kinds. Full stop. This is full stop, but also fool's top. Sancti sancti meekly loose, defend ye noose from prowl abouts. Make a shine on the cursed. Amen. This is like a little prayer, right? But at the same time, it's also maybe a prayer against erectile dysfunction because it is meekly loose.
And Chuff stands for Sean,
Yeah, Chuff is Sean.
and Sean you mentioned has parallels to Saint Michael. They
Yes.
have Michael the Archangel.
Yeah.
So he guards, at least in Milton, right? He guards Garden of Eden with a sword, maybe a flaming sword. But
Yeah.
it's interesting because at first I thought his sword flashed light like lightning, and Satan is the light bringer.
Mm.
So I had to think twice about who is being referred to.
Well, and that's actually a really good case of like anytime we're trying to discriminate or separate Shem from Sean, our efforts end up failing. They end up kind of um, interchanging with each other. And literally, when we get into the Night Lessons chapter, into chapter two, with this wacky layout, Shem and Sean get their respective sides of the marginalia. So at the beginning, Shem is one side and Sean is the other. I can't remember which one, but I have a diagram that I will send to the Google Classroom. But halfway through the Night Lessons chapter, they switch sides. So they literally have this interplay going out on the page to, to go along with this sort of symbolic interplay that's going on between them, that anything that one represents can be found in the other. That's why the Shem the Penman chapter, chapter 1.7, was so interesting because we are being told about Shem, but from the mouth of Sean, often in ways that end up indicting Sean himself in his attempts to try to exonerate himself, from being culpable of his brother's behavior. So then Glug gets his little description, but the Dublin Sulph was in Glugger, right? The devil himself was in Glug. That lost to Lurthing, the next to nothing, but also he's a lost soul, right? He's not one of the chosen ones. He's not in the pale yet. He has to make his way into, in this case, he's like the outcast of the Garden of Eden, to go with what Rick was saying. He was spuffing and sputing, tussing like Anisyme, whipping his eyesalt and gnashing his teats over the brivities from existers and the outer lubux of life. He hath couchy chosen a clay blade, and makes praises to his three of clubs. To part from these, my corsets, is into overlusting fear, acts of feet, hoof and jarity, athlete's long foot, jowl up here. And of course, right, we're getting, as is often the case with Finnegans Wake, just little kind of blips of sense in between various idioms we might be able to recognize. I'm wondering if makes praises to his three of clubs is a masturbation innuendo. Um, Considering his clay blade, maybe a phallic reference.
Mm.
I don't know.
And someone mentioned exile, Joyce's exile, um, and I guess I'm surprised so far reading the book that I don't hear is more echoes of Dante, considering how much he loved him. And I mean, I think people say the commodious, vicus of commodious in the first sentences, comedy could be raised. But uh, I, I guess I'm just reminding myself to always look out for
Yeah,
Dante, whether he shows up or not.
yeah. Well, and this is such an interesting work because there's a tendency, and I've fallen prey to and still fall prey to this, of overestimating Joyce's revolutionary praxis, like assuming that um, he's abandoning all faith, all values, all conservation of any kind, and he's establishing some radically new literary form, in style and perspective. Um, and in a sense, he is doing that his whole career. He's very non-serviam throughout. And yet at the same time, and scholars have only recently started talking about this, there's this renewed interest in Catholic mysteries in Finnegans Wake, with this mystery of resurrection. I mean, Finnegans Wake, the song is, a play on the resurrection. And Joyce, strangely enough, I think wants to show that there's something of seriousness in comedy, that there's something authentic in comedy that allows him to say things obliquely and therefore much more complicatedly and nuancedly than he otherwise would. So there's definitely an interest in, I mean, like his two big influences are Giordano Bruno and Giambattista Vico, these like Renaissance thinkers. I think Bruno's a little bit before the Renaissance, maybe. Um, but he's not necessarily playing a lot, in terms of his big philosophical influences on modern thinkers. He's going back, um, not to Plato per se, but he's sort of threading the needle here. So there is a lot of interests. Joyce said in an interview, I think, maybe it was a letter to his patron, Harriet Shaw Weaver, that book three is structured as the Via Crucis, this 14 stages of the cross. Um, I don't think anyone has yet figured out exactly how and if that is true, if it can be split into 14 sections. Um, but the point is that Joyce did at least implicitly, um, desire for it to be connected to these sort of classic tenets or concerns of faith and not just revolution.
Yeah, and people should. The Florida James Joyce series has Joyce, Aquinas, Aristotle came out. So I read it like 2 years ago. Of course, don't remember any of it. But boy, that's his wheelhouse, I guess. Like you said, doesn't go back as far as Plato, but right after that,
Yeah.
Aristotle, and then of course Aquinas. And so now you've got me. Yeah, I mean that's just his Catholicism, and it is so. I grew up Protestant, so I don't know much, but it's so fascinating that for this kind of secular seeming person, modernism,
Yeah.
uh, people shouldn't disregard.
Yeah, well, and he wrote all the way back in 1904, I think right before he was about to leave Ireland forever, he writes in a letter that he will not be despondent because he has never met anyone with a faith like his. So this idea of faith, faith to what or to whom is a great question, but Joyce has a very complex relationship to his establishments, to those around him and before him.
Um, I also think that just I don't know. I guess it's a tendency to look in people's work for what they believe. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But I just think that for me, again, it's he to me is just letting the voices and languages and the world, you know, through his text. And I don't know. It's to me, I don't know. I don't have the right metaphor for it. So why would he not sort of, activate every discourse, right?
Yeah.
Why would he not activate every way of being or speaking or writing? Yeah, but I mean, I'm not. I was raised Protestant as well, but I have many Catholic buddies who who attest. You don't lose that. That kind of structuring of the world is there. But I don't know. For me, it's just again, it's mostly about language. But I was also going to say this section that you grabbed. I'm always loving the little skewed prayers that he throws into the book
Mhm.
throughout. And how amen is spelled amen, and so the way he plays with the Latin liturgy, like to me, I'm sancti sancti. I'm thinking sanctum,
Mhm.
sanctorum or whatever. Just that messing with Latin, and all of a sudden you're like in the middle of a prayer, and I don't know. I just always enjoy those.
I do too. Here's an example of a little Catholic instance here. Another prayer. And Cynthia, you're totally right. Prayer, I think, is one of his favorite idioms for some reason. Xanthos, Xanthos, Xanthos. We thank to thine, mighty innocent, that didst bring it off, fleet, fleet. Should in after years it become about, you will after desk, job duty becoming a band midland mansioner, we and I shall reside with our obeisant servants among Burke's mobility at La Roseraie. So there's the rosary, and he keeps going. On the next page, we get a different little prayer kind of thing. Enchained, dear sweet Stanislaus. So this is Stanislaus, but also Stain and useless are in there. Young confessor, dearest, we hear about Oblos, O Coelicola, the salutant, pattern of our unschuled, pageant master, deliverer of soft missives round the world in 40 mails, bag, belt, and balmy beam. Right, so there's all these sort of instances of prayer, and I think they're really kind of intelligent and interesting.
I would perhaps call that more of an ode, though, right? There's
Mm.
also the sort of poetic ode, the
Hmm.
classic address
Yeah.
with those O's,
Hmm.
and a lot of O's on this this
Yes.
page. Yeah,
And of course, Ulysses, the first words spoken are Buck praying to, or chanting a prayer.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Anyone
There's
want?
another
Oh yeah, go
there's another
ahead.
passage that caught my interest.
Yeah.
It's 239 to 240, so just 2 pages for you. I'm gonna try to read some of this. These bright elects, consent consorted, they were waltzing up their hillside with their prince of handsome Angeline Chuff. Well, in those word bus there won't bear's way, mirroring unknown, a place where pigeons carry fire to see the vans, a mirror hill, bilge, and so forth. Oaths and screams and bawly groans, with the belchy bub hub and hell below, bedeemed and bedabbled in the ravening Lucius spear. Hell's it end, wailed it else. London's breach lay foul and uncouth, not to be broached by puns and riddles. Yet the ring gate run rosoriously, with a dreadful brat, you. Yash ate sausage and mash. So he found he bash, poor Yash, and you wanna make one of our Mick party. No honey whost in our spulse laced. For poor Gloria was dazed and laid in his grave, he laid in his grave.
I like that. Yeah, that's got such a nice rhythm to it.
Yeah, the way that ends, it's like a folk song. He was dazed and lay in his grave.
Hmm.
Aye, yes, he laid it like that repetition at the end is very
Yeah.
folky.
And one of the interesting things about this chapter is after they are playing the game for a certain amount of time, the sun is now coming down. So we've been heliotropes this whole time, trying to follow the sun and find find the truth of this color. And the sun is starting to go down, and as a result, the parents have to come out and tell the kids to come back in. So there's this sudden interruption of parental authority where they've been playing this little authority game amongst themselves, and now I think it's the father explicitly that comes out and beckons them to come inside. And that leads us into the second chapter, the night lessons.
I believe it says a thunder word,
Oh yeah, where's that
the
at?
round of the sound of the lound of the thing. It's near the very end. Yeah, 257.
Yeah, there we go. Another one of these thunder
And is
words.
that the first one in book two? Does anyone know?
I think
Okay.
so. Yeah. Yeah, so this is like some kind of ending, right? Because we have this fall and applause, and then the play thou shouldst game here endeth. The curtain drops by deep request. And then we get that amen again there.
Mhm.
There's also the children rhymes. He has a lot of these children's rhymes. So in the text we just looked at, there's it's oats. What is it? Oats, peas, greens, and barley grow.
Huh.
That's embedded in there. If we can you go back up and
Yeah, what page was
see
that?
at the section that HP was bringing us to.
237,
What was it?
239, I think.
Where was it?
Yeah, right here.
Yeah, right. So la la la. Where was it? Oh, right. Where is it? I'm not finding it. Oh, I think it's. I saw it here. Oh yeah, there it is. Oaths and screams and barley groans. And then also the Yasha ate sausage and mass. I mean, he's often doing these little, feel like nursery rhymes, not just in
Hmm.
this section, but nursery rhymes or limericks or I don't know, not limericks, but
Yeah,
just children's songs or yeah,
yeah.
and then twisting the spellings.
And there's been a good amount of scholarship that has pointed that out. There's a whole book called like
Mm,
Children's Rhymes in Finnegans Wake or something like that, or Children's
I believe it. I
whatever.
believe it.
Well, the last line on that page is yet the ring gate round rosily, uh, ring around the rosy. Yeah. So
Good catch.
yeah.
Good
Huh.
catch. Yeah, so right. See, and like each of these build on each other, where when you go back through a section and decide to read it again, having just the smallest amount of foothold of like, oh, there's a song going on here, or oh, there's a dance going on here. It gives you just that little bit of kind of narrative tactility that you need to kind of more easily make your way through. And you're able to sort of architectonically build up Finnegans Wake in several kind of strata or layers, kind of time after time. And you start to build up some sense of comfortability, and you're like, okay, I can kind of roughly paint a picture for myself of what's going on. And that's one of my favorite things about Finnegans Wake is I love just giving people the first page and asking them like, just give me something about what you think is going on here. And I will get so many different answers, and they always seem to have some sort of interesting plausibility that kind of changes my perspective and makes me consider. I mean, like I've said before, there are no rules for reading Finnegans Wake other than the ones that we make amongst ourselves and as a community that we decide works for us, that helps us more deeply appreciate a passage or a symbol or a sound.
Well, I would say the rules are set by language, that
Mm.
and not that they're, obviously the openness of interpretation is extreme, right?
Yeah.
But I mean this playing and citation and riffing and parody and whatever
Yeah.
polyvocality and stuff. So I do think, I don't know, this could just be the way I see the world, but I do think sometimes, I don't know. I was going to say some readings are more successful than others, but
Yeah.
I don't know if I believe that. I just think, some of it is just, for me, it's sometimes just like being able to keep up with the intertextuality, because this is someone who's read so much more than any of us have.
Yeah.
And definitely folks of that era read more. And this, I mean, Joyce, I have no idea. I don't know much about his life, but I mean, obviously, just completely, just has and obviously when you write, you look stuff up, you whatever. It's not like it's all here per se, but I think just kind of like, for me, I often think about it as like catching a citation, and not just to a literal text, right, but to a fragment of language, like with the rhyme and so forth.
Yeah.
So I think in that, I don't want to say rule. I don't. I'm not afraid of rules, but right. So it is about
Yeah.
it's about the linguistic expectations, and it's about screwing with them, and just yeah.
Yeah. And that's a great point because it should be known that my kind of no rules is obviously not anything goes, but it is rather loose in terms of the possible philosophies of interpretation that one can have. And there's lots of nuance to be had here. What I think is really interesting is that um, so many people call Joyce a modernist, and I think for most of his career, I think he is. But I think by the time we get to Finnegans Wake, we're really kind of butting up against the postmodern. I go back and forth about the usefulness of referring to this as the first postmodern text or a postmodern text. But in many ways, the most interesting thing that Joyce is doing um, is not only is he doing parody, not only is he copying in order to critique, but I think we really get some genuine instances of pastiche, where something is being copied or replicated or referred to without an explicit rhetorical aim in mind. There's something of copying for copying's sake because of the rising commodity culture that he's a part of. And I think Joyce is really interested in reflecting that in literature, particularly when it comes to this idea of rumor. Rumor is really important to Finnegans Wake. The way that word of mouth works, the way stories have gotten told for most of our history, being basically just a type of special rumor that gets a certain status. And Joyce is really interested of, okay, what does it look like if a book is a rumor unto itself and for itself and is constantly talking about itself? And that's hitting on some sort of meta textuality, something we might get in like Borges, for example, or John Barth, right? Some of these kind of nascent postmodern authors. So in many ways, to Cynthia's point, I think what's most interesting about Finnegans Wake is the way that it plays with linguistic expectations, not with the explicit goal of surpassing them, as if we were capable of surpassing language. I think Joyce is doing something much more nuanced of trying to find all these little gaps in our linguistic expectations. And I mean, we're literally playing in this chapter. The chapter's all about play. Um, and laughter and dance and right, all of these extra linguistic things, but being encoded into language. And he's kind of playing with like, okay, how far can I take this very plastic medium with a lot of rules that we take for granted? Um, oh, we got to look at my favorite passage from this chapter. I think it's just super cool, and I know some of it is a reference to Macbeth, I think. Page 250. Yes, here we go. Um, right here. It has this very particular cadence. I still don't really know what it means, but it sounds amazing. For a burning wold is come to dance amain. Glamours hath moider's leab, and herefore colders must leap no more. Lack breath must leap no more. Lel lulls for libelman libeling his lore. Lo, 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 Lieberman, you love to be leaving Libnius. Lift your right to your liber lord, link your left to your lass of liberty. La, la, Lieberman, your lips but a loop to lee. A fork of hazel o'er the field invokes the vervine virgin's ode. If you cross this rood as you roamed the rand, I'm blessed, but you'd feel him a blasting rod. Behind me, freeze from evil smells, perdition stinks before us. So I think, Rick, to your point, I think there's something of the Miltonian Satan here, of the non-servium who's, behind me, all you that would oppose me.
And that's for a burning wood is come to Dunsinane, which is Macbeth. Um, Cold Doors, I think he was Thane of Cawdor.
Hmm.
But that, but that's my problem. Whatever I've read in the past is all I. So the very beginning of book two is going to be a play, right? So I somehow thought of the Mousetrap in Hamlet, which I'm so fascinated. That's like a frame narrative. That's like a play in a play. I assume people did it before Shakespeare, but and then when the players arrive at the castle, Hamlet like wants the main player to recite this um, play that I don't think exists.
Hmm.
And then Hamlet starts it but gets it wrong. He says something about the Hyrcanian beast. So halfway down that first paragraph on page 219, there's Hyrcan, Hyrca. So Hamlet, the players come because he wants to put a play in front of Claudius, or who's the new king, the bad king, to see his reaction because the play is about a king being murdered. Um, so I saw in a few lines down puppetry and ghosters. And then we have while the Caesar in chief looks on. So and then Senate is, I think, in the maybe scene two of the first act when the new king and the queen appear. The Senate is played. With all the queen's mom, I can see as queen as mom. Um, the end of that first paragraph talks about blood-ridden Merthyr.
Mm.
Obviously, the king's brother killed the king.
Yeah.
So just bear with me. The next page, when you go down to Hump, they talk about Kappa Pipe, and so the guards tell Hamlet that the ghost of his father was dressed like Kappa Pei, which means like from head to foot.
Hmm.
And then, promise I'm almost done. Page 221, Saunderson mentions ears quack, and then the last line of Saunderson is mildew. So Hamlet's father is killed because poison's poured into his ear.
Hmm.
But Hamlet says to his mother, like, um, the new king is like a mildewed ear. I looked that up. So I, but the problem is that I shouldn't let that distract me from maybe that's not. These are also just terms that a ghoster is a term, So it's so I think I'm always going to be slowed down by
Mm.
these things. I see that, I just happen to have read once. But also, like, you want to read, well, you were saying grasp onto something and that can help you. So
Yeah.
I did grasp on the fact that this is the play that's going to be put on. And then the first several pages seemed easier in a way than much of book one. So for what that's worth, yeah.
Yeah.
But certainly the play within a play, the frame narrative, Joseph Conrad does it so much, and that modern or even postmodern. Um, it's fascinating that Joyce is
Yeah.
using the
No, I
play.
mean, I wouldn't worry about getting like distracted or bogged down per se. I think that, and this is something I'm totally pulling out of my ass, but across postmodern literature, there's this concern with what I call the paranoid imagination, with this sense that there's always something lurking, and we don't know if it's, an authentic reality or something we're merely perceiving, and there's this interplay between the two, and I think Finnegans Wake is really quite obsessed with that. I mean, this frame narrative stuff Joyce is really interested with for a number of theoretical reasons. I mean, the letter in Finnegans Wake being in some way, Finnegans Wake itself is a way for it to talk about itself obliquely, a way for it to be paranoidly self-conscious. Does it understand what it means to itself? You'll have these moments of lucidity throughout Finnegans Wake where he sort of seems to address the reader and go, okay, I know this is really tough, but I promise that it's meaningful if you just work at it hard enough or whatever. And whether or not those promises can actually, you know, play out to their full extent, that's kind of an open question of, you're always asking yourself, can I take any of this seriously? Can I take what I'm reading seriously, the interpretation I give, the elements that I choose to prioritize? Um, and I think there's something, Joyce is very much a modernist in a sense of like Mahler saying that a symphony needs to be like the world, that it needs to contain everything. I think Joyce is doing something of the same thing where he wants to achieve the mass and the scope of the world in a piece of literature. And when you're looking at the world, how are you to master it without kind of specializing on some little thing and kind of trying to pick something out to help you along? So I would certainly say there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, it's good to air these things out too, because like, how does Cynthia read it, or how does Walter, or how do you, like? There's no wrong answer, and
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah.
But distracted from what, Rick? Right? I mean,
Well, I guess the overall plot, if there is one. Yeah. No, I
yeah,
mean that's
right.
probably
You know,
being too hard on myself. But yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, is that Eliot
Yeah, one of
distracted?
my
I think it's Eliot distracted, a true modernist, distracted by distraction from distraction or something.
mm,
Mm.
But I don't know. Gavin, I am really, and this is sort of maybe a separate question, but I am super interested in the contention. I mean, I don't know how interested I'm more interested in the book than scholarship at this point in my life. But I am really interested in the conversation around Joyce as a modernist or a postmodernist, because even when I got into Ulysses, which I had started to read long, long ago, and just accepted, modernists, whatever. And I love a lot of modernist writers. But when I was actually reading the book in the book club, I was like, why are people calling him modernist and not postmodernist? I mean, I know these lines are kind of silly, but I was just shocked. And then modernism often used to in scholarship circles, and I think it still does a little bit, sort of plays into a lot of sort of the great man theory and the kind of genius,
Mhm.
right, and the sort of radical breaking with tradition and so forth. Whereas, I mean, I love I'm going to forget the name of the episode in Ulysses, the one where Bloom masturbates on the beach, but where the girl Gertie where Gertie's has this perfect woman's magazine discourse. You know, it's this wonderful language of my ankle is turned just so, and I have my blue ribbons like this, and the way he often activates commercial, really fabulous or commercial and journalistic language. And to me, it's like, I don't know, that again, to me, that is a kind of intertextuality, polyvocality that I just found it interesting that my group was all about kind of Joyce the modernist. But for me, it's like, how could you? But I know a lot of modernists are uncomfortable with postmodernism and so forth. I mean, there have been battles and all of that, but I find that really interesting.
No, I totally agree that that Nausicaa episode is a perfect example. Like that is pastiche. That we're really getting inside this particularly commercial form. Um, and it's interesting to think about, the postmodernists are often concerned with pastiching, things that have commercial or political relevance. But Joyce also wants to go into the spiritual realm and go into, all sorts of mythical traditions and whatnot. There's this really interesting, it's the very end of this chapter, and for those who are interested in kind of postmodernism or postmodern theory at all, Jacques Derrida was really fascinated by these two pages, and he's written a lot about it. He wrote the Tours de Babel, where he talks about the Tower of Babel, and he focuses on Finnegans Wake a fair amount. He wrote this very long piece, Ulysses Gramophone, where he talks about Ulysses and whatnot. But this is a really interesting kind of, I don't even really know what he's doing here, but he sort of slips into this kind of, I don't know, sacred mindset, let's say. I'll start kind of halfway through the page right here. For the clear of the air from on high has spoken in tumbledum tambledam to his tumbledim tumbledum world. And mogaphenoised by that phonemanon, the inhabitants of the earth have terrumbled from fundament unto fundament, and from tweedle-deedledums down to tweedle-deededes. Loud hear us, loud graciously hear us. Now have thy children entered into their habitations, and nation-clad, camp meeting over, to shin it, God be thanked. Thou hast closed the portals of the habitations of thy children, and thou hast set thy guards thereby, even guardidimus and guardidomas, that thy children may read in the book of the opening of the mind to light, and err not in the darkness, which is the afterthought of thy no matter, by the guardians of those guards which are thy boatmen, the cheery boys with the carry bombers in their crew beams. Pray your prayers, Timothy, and back to bunk, Tom. So, right, we're telling the kids to go to sleep. The day has come to a close. We're getting this sort of, okay, things are being peaceful. Till tree from tree, tree among trees, tree over tree becomes stone to stone, stone between stones, stone under stone forever. So this is the tree and stone, the triston motif that we've been talking about between Shem and Sean, this link between vitality and obstinacy. O loud, hear the we beseech of these, of each of these thy unlitten ones. Grant sleep in hours time, O loud, that they take no chill, that they do ming no murder, that they shall not go meet mad trees. Loud, heap miseries upon us, yet entwine our arts with laughters low. Ha, he, he, ho, ho, mum. So it's so beautiful. It's a great little, I mean, if I ever have kids, this is what I'm going to read them to go to sleep because it's like it's very peaceful and kind of whimsical and fun. Um, and I have no idea what it's saying other than like the day is over, we're going to sleep. Let us have good sleep.
It's very the first that paragraph, kind of Old Testament Nephilim, like Nephilim and Ismail,
Mm,
and even Azrael. So it's almost like they're reading
yeah.
parts of the Bible to him, and then that and loud hear us and all that. Then maybe it gets a little And then even the firmament sounds very Genesis, but I don't think it gets particularly New Testament after that. I think it stays anyway.
Yeah, I'm trying to find. Yeah. So Derrida writes like, gosh, has to be like 30 or 40 pages at least on these three words, and he wore. He's just like fascinated
Oh
by these
wow.
three words and just goes crazy with it. I think
Yeah,
that's funny.
like does he touch on like it and he was and just
Yeah,
different readings, I guess?
yeah, yeah. He's interested in the relationship of war and the Tower of Babel and like whether or not it is you know, instituting the war of languages in order to prevent humans from making something, or whether it's the condition by which they make something with language, and therefore whether, whether this is a curse against humanity or a gift. And he's really interested in kind of the push and pull that goes on here with a lot of these phrases, because you'll find several words, and I don't know that Joyce is necessarily coming from the German tradition, but he did speak German, and he was in a lot of German cultures. German has a lot of words
Mhm.
which mean two opposite things. Aufhebung is the very famous one that Hegel uses, right? Which is both to lift something up or restore it at the same time it is to like put down something or negate it, move past it, relinquish it. And you'll find tons of phrases in Finnegans Wake that have at least two, if not more, totally competing, totally opposite meanings that do not synthesize. And I think that's an important aspect of the language that Joyce is trying to do. And it's something that we may have discussed this before with the difference between the pun and the portmanteau word. But right, the pun gives you that sense of intermingling of languages. But once you kind of figure it out, once you find the solution, which is what this chapter is kind of playing with, um, then now it even makes more sense. It gives you this sense of linguistic mastery that you understand and can synthesize everything into a common whole. But the portmanteau is very different precisely because, for one, we can't discriminate these parts like we can with a pun. Like smog, we can split it into smoke and fog, and we can figure out the sort of basic elements that it's made of. We can't necessarily do that with a portmanteau word. So it creates a lot of problems of, oh, this is a word that's confusing to me. So, like a school child, I'm going to try to sound it out. I'm going to try to split it up. All of those are kind of anathema to Finnegans Wake in a very particular sense. So we're met with a lot of challenges when it comes to like trying to wade through this and get to the bottom of things. It just seems kind of like turtles all the way down kind of thing.
Is is there a thought that the parents are religious, um, traditional, and are the kids? I, I don't know. Like, are they putting them to bed and doing this by rote? Or are they? I'll be interested to read along and see if
Yeah. I
H
mean,
and ALP are.
it's a really interesting thought. Um, one of the things about the Night Lessons chapter, and I guess I'll just go to the first page just so we kind of have a visual of
Mm,
what's going on here. Totally different from anything that's happened in the book so far. And we're immediately met with a number of problems, as per usual in Finnegans Wake, what the heck is going on? But also, how do you even read it? Are you supposed to just go all the way left to right on the page? Are you just supposed to read the center, read the marginalia afterwards? Are you supposed to try to read them in tandem with one another? Lots of problems there. But to your point, Rick, about the religiosity of the parents, this Night Lessons chapter some have said that it's like the layout of a school book with like marginalia and annotations all around it, and whatnot. Um, Sean's side here on the right has a lot of sort of classical kind of, Latinate words of various kinds, whereas Shem's over here is a little bit more playful, kind of whimsical. And then the footnotes here are Izzy's, the daughter. And I think these are the most interesting aspect of this book. There is a huge one on page 279. Um, this huge footnote, and it is a little letter in and of itself. It's kind of a, to me, it's riffing on this letter motif because Izzy has been, she's been pushed to the margins this whole time, and now she takes up almost the entirety of the page. It's a brilliant piece of writing, and we can definitely talk about it at some point. One thing that I think is interesting, um, I was thinking fairly killing times of putting an end to myself in my malady. So suicide she's talking about here. So some some heavy themes are being discussed in this for sure. Um, but there's a lot of shifting dynamics going on here where it seems that once we're at night, now all these questions of mortality and sexuality are able to finally come out and express themselves properly. There's there really this grasping for like a personal idiom for each of the children here. How do they express themselves as a character, as a personality? Um, and something interesting goes on here, and we've talked about this near the beginning, this wacky little diagram going on here. And this is the shifting point where afterwards Shem and Sean switch their marginalia sides of the page. And again, I'll send a little graphic that details kind of some theories of when the switchings are occurring and who has what side when. Um, but throughout this chapter, Shem and Sean have now gone to sleep, and there's something of a switching of their dynamics where in the mime of the Mick, and the Maggies, Sean has been the authority figure who safeguards sexuality. But really, he safeguards it precisely insofar as he doesn't participate. And the Nightlessons chapter seems to suggest that's because he doesn't know what sex is. He doesn't know what female sexuality is, and he doesn't know what lies underneath the panties which the mime has been concerned with. And now Shem takes on this sort of teaching role and decides that he's going to teach Sean about sexuality, and in particular about the female body. Um, and there's some really interesting stuff going on here. I don't think that I'll be able to find the passage that I'm looking for. But this diagram, many have speculated, is, a sort of a bottom-up view of the female genitals with the buttocks and the pubic delta and whatnot. And this is a sort of symbolic cipher that Shem is proffering to Sean to try to explain to him this is what sex is, buddy. And this is their sort of, coming of age together as brothers. And there's some questionable, certainly interesting dynamics going on here in terms of incest, which, as we've talked about, has been a theme, although usually a sublimated theme, since the beginning of Finnegans Wake. On page 29, HCE is insectuous from his birth, right? So he's incestuous from the very ground up, which is very interesting, seeing that in his kids too, they're being taught about sex in a rather incestuous sort of way. Um, so lots of things going on about whether or not the children repeat the same sins of their parents or the same predilections as their parents. Yeah, some interesting stuff.
Incest wasn't such a factor in Ulysses, I don't think. Um, so and I don't know if Freud made that more prevalent, the thoughts of it and the timing.
Hmm.
The Sound and the Fury, Faulkner, he had the vision of the sister climbing up a tree to look into the second floor of the house during a funeral, and the three brothers below see her muddy drawers.
Hmm.
And it's like obviously symbolic or something impure. In the Sound of Fury, the first two chapters is each brother um, their point of view. And Caddy, the girl, never has a chapter, even though she's sort of the center. Um, so, and then of course, Quentin, there is a lot of incestuous sort of um, thing. And that was like late 20s, he wrote that. But and then in Absalom, it's a factor. So it was always sort of in Faulkner's head. But here, I don't know if it's sort of more focused in Finnegans Wake. Interesting.
Hmm. That is very interesting. And I have friends who are Faulkner heads, but I don't really
I am, but
nice, nice. Okay, that's great. Definitely feel free to bring that up because like
the drawers. It's interesting
yeah,
that comes out here.
yeah. Um another passage that I do want to briefly look at because there's lots of little ciphers going on in this passage, lots of new mysteries. This chapter has received a lot of attention from criticism. But here on page 281, we've got this huge section in basically exclusively French. And you might wonder, okay, what is that? Well, if we go to Fuite here, I just looked up Quinet to get to this because this is a quote of Edgar Quinet from his Introduction à la philosophie de l'histoire de l'humanité, the introduction of the philosophy of human history. And he's basically quoting verbatim a line from Quinet. And I think one of these has the English translation. Let me see.
It
Yeah,
was, yeah, it should be today as in the days of plenty in Columbia, yeah, that one.
yes. So this is really kind of a very telling philosophical influence that can help kind of ground these larger questions of like the cyclicality of history. He says, today, as in the days of Pliny and Columella, the hyacinth disports in Gaul, the periwinkle in Illyria, the daisy on the ruins of Numantia. And while around them the cities have changed masters and names, while some have ceased to exist, while the civilizations have collided with one another and shattered, their peaceful generations have passed through the ages and have come up to us, one following the other, fresh and cheerful, as on the days of battles. This is a very interesting passage, for one, because it connects with a symbol that has long been a part of Joyce's oeuvre, flowers. In Ulysses, this is a big theme, right? We have Leopold Bloom, what Henry Flower is his pseudonym, tons of stuff going on with flowers and blooming and this idea of, can one birth something out of oneself is something that Stephen is really interested in. And Joyce seems to be continually interested in this theme. And now he's combining it with this question of civilization and history and battle and conflict, right? Which the two brothers um, symbolize. At the same time that the brothers are each other's passage into adulthood, into civility or rationality. This is their sort of break as they begin to become adults. And there's this eternal question that Finnegans Wake seems to just kind of be sifting around in its mouth, but refuses to spit out, about, whether or not things can really change or whether or not things are just recurring the same way over and over, whether history is just a repetitious rhyme or whether there's such thing as genuine change. Um, but I wanted to just point this out because it's an important passage and it's the kind of thing where if you're like me and you don't speak French, the passage just flies you by. And, you know, I can make like a good like 2% of like a Latin passage just through kind of loan word, associations, but you give me something like this Quinet passage and it just kind of flies right over my head.
I believe you said this book is best read reading aloud, right?
Yeah, I'd say that's a good idea.
Yeah, well, this chapter this chapter was a pain in the ass to read because
Yeah.
the ship had Sean marginalia, and then there's Izzy the footnotes. I had to give all of them a separate voice, and then there's this little short passage in 286 where in the central text it becomes a mini Shem and Chandra situation with Dolph and Kev.
Hmm.
and then while the marginalia is still happening. So that was interesting to read.
Hmm.
So like, yeah, can you need her now, Mass Dolph, the Troller? And then there's all the marginalia.
Hmm.
I, and I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know about this passage. And then there's like the last two pages where you're jumping w between words, like
Hmm.
one word you read from the main passage, and then you go to the left, and then you go to the right. One word, like one word each. Oh my goodness, it was
Yeah.
painful to read.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a
It is the most. I think it is the most challenging passage to read in fiction, but that's just
yeah.
my opinion. I've not read a lot of books.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about that.
I think there's a great amount of difficulty on various levels, on a sort of content level at the same time of like reading praxis of how do you even go about approaching it. Um, this is a nice kind of ALP passage here, talking about our pious and pure fair one. All has concomited to this that she shall tread them life trees' leaves, whose silence hitherto has shone as sphere of silver fastal barnstone. That fount Bandusian shall play liquic music, and after odors sigh of musk. Bluffs blush blothe one deer that was. Sleep in the water, drug at the fire, shake the dust off, and dream your one who would give her side curls too. Till later llamas is led in by Baith our washwives, a weird of wonder, tenebrous as that evil Thorngarth, a field of fairy blithe as this flowering wild. This passage is actually really interesting now that I'm looking at it because it seems to be using weird in the Old English sense for any of you that know the kind of contentious um, meanings of weird in Old English. But yeah, I just think it's a very pretty passage and it's kind of talking about, you know, this force of nature that is ALP, her liquic music. She's liquid at the same time that she's quick and gone before you can figure her out. Um, And I think that's part of why ALP can be respite for all of us readers because she is the most comforting character precisely because she promises change because she refuses to stay the same, because she refuses to go under one moniker. And that sort of fluid principle sort of overflows to all characters. So she's sort of this fount, this Quelle in German, I know, is the word for source in like a textual sense. At the same time, it is in like the source of a river, right? So she's this constant kind of question mark over can anything ever really be understood if it's always changing and always other than it seems to be. But Joyce is trying, I think, to say that there's something of respite in that fact of life.
Rick mentioned something to do with Dante before, and I've been reading the Divine Comedy, Mark Muse, the translation with the original Italian next to it,
Hmm.
because I was getting kind of impatient trying to read an English translation, and I've been getting so much out of the Italian, and I
Hmm.
think I owe a lot to the Wake because you kind of learn to kind of assimilate. I think this is what Joyce is trying to do because obviously he was a polyglot, but assimilate the process of learning a language and understanding things on multiple levels when you understand it in two languages and to kind of go with the flow a little bit. And yeah, I've been having those rewards with the original Dante, to be honest. And
Hmm.
yeah, really fun.
Yeah, and that's a great lesson to take to Finnegans Wake. Boriana Alexandrova wrote a really wonderful monograph, Joyce, Multilingualism and the Ethics of Reading. I posted a video on it several months ago on my channel if you're kind of interested in a little taste of what she has to say. But long story short, she basically makes this claim that those who actually don't have English as their first language actually have the kind of best inroad to Finnegans Wake because Finnegans Wake makes everyone a foreigner in their own mother tongue. It basically positions all of us as language learners and those who are familiar with what it's like to approach language in the way, I mean, when you learn another language, it's funny. I have a German professor friend who's, German is his first language, English his second language. His English is better than mine, especially on a grammar level, because of the way he had to learn English, and because for most of us who know it natively, we kind of are able to fly by a lot of those nets, as Joyce would put it. But we're not really able to do that in Finnegans Wake anymore. We have to start thinking about emphasis and pronunciation and spelling, and where do the words come from, and all of these questions we would otherwise not have to worry about, but that a foreigner learning a language might indeed need to think about in order to successfully speak the language. So there's much to be had in considering the foreignness as kind of part of the point, right? That by being positioned outside of the text and you're never really kind of able to inculcate yourself into the text, that's precisely what helps one to read it because you're always kind of learning and trying to use new experimental strategies. Um, so definitely consider kind of adopting that perspective when reading the book. That being said, that's it. Happy reading. Enjoy book two, and feel free to come with enjoyable passages next time that we can look at.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See y'all.
Thanks. See ya.
Thank
See you.
you. See ya.